Let the fire crackle low. Let the wind outside the thatch roof drift quietly across the hilltop. Tonight, you step into the forgotten world before the bloodshed. A world of earth, ash, and quiet bread. Breathe slow. The ground is old and it remembers everything. In the forgotten prehistoric war that killed 95% of all men. Settle in. Chapter 1 Before the Storm. The year is 5470 BCE. You wake to the smell of damp wool and yesterday's fire. The woven mat beneath you itches where the threads have worn thin from too many nights spent curled beside your son. Beside you, he breathes slowly, wrapped in an old hide that smells faintly of crushed mint and river mud. The first light isn't sunlight. It's smoke creeping through the roof vent of the longhouse, filtered gold by the morning haze. The air carries the warm scent of barley, mild and sticky, like steam from porridge that's been simmering since before dawn. Someone stirred the pot already. You sit up, bones stiff from last night's rain. The reed walls whisper as wind passes through the cracks. Somewhere across the field, you hear goats. Not yours, they belong to Elder Vec, and they're always the first to wake. They make that sound again, a low, uneasy bleat, like they know something you don't. You slip outside barefoot. The earth is soft, soaked from last night's storm. It squelches between your toes, cold and familiar. You used to hate that feeling. Now you find it comforting. A reminder that the world, at least here, still follows its old rules. The village smells of wet ash, smoothed wood, and people. Strong people carrying grain and sweat in their skin. There are only 12 huts now. There used to be 15. The 13th collapsed in a flood 2 winters ago. 14th burned after a cooking fire spread. The 15th, well, no one speaks about the 15th anymore. You nod to the women hauling water from the river. Ilma is among them, her long braids swinging like a dark pendulum down her back. She's strong, older than you by a few summers, and the last person left from the burned hut. She doesn't smile much now. Down the path, Tehu is already out in the reeds. You spot his crooked silhouette, back bent, arms rhythmically parting the tall green blades. He's looking for frog spawn and harvest stalks. The basket on his back is only half full. You call to him softly. He doesn't hear. Or maybe he does and pretends not to. Tehu was never one for words. But he brought back your son from the river last spring when he fell in chasing a flat stone. And for that, you've never said thank you. It hangs between you like fog. You return to the longhouse just as the barley cakes are set out. Flat discs with burnt edges. The smell curling through the door like a warm hand on your shoulder. The girl baking them, little Hassa, barely 10, pokes each one with a sharpened stick before placing it on the stone. She says it keeps the evil spirits out. You let her believe that. Today is like any other, and that's what frightens you, because yesterday the traitor came. He arrived near dusk, limping, with dried blood on his thigh and 3 arrows broken off at the shaft in his sack. He said nothing at first, just looked at the sky as if it owed him something. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. He didn't name the attackers, only said they walked without sound and left no fathers behind. You remember how Elder Vec laughed at that, though no one else did. That night, the village was too quiet. And this morning, every man checks the spear rack before stepping out. Even Tehu, who hasn't touched a weapon in years. The sun is higher now, cresting above the line of trees that mark the edge of your land. The light dances on wet grass, and a few children chase each other through the smoke from the cooking pits. Their laughter is sharp, too sharp. It startles a bird from the rafters. You fetch water and grind seed, the same as always. Yet today your hands move slower, as if they already know what your mind refuses to accept. Something is coming. The goat bleats again. You stop. Listen. Nothing but wind. But you remember what Ilma told you last winter. About the dreams. She said she saw skulls stacked like baskets. Said she saw men with no hands and boys with no names. She whispered of black arrows and songs that ended too soon. The elders called her fevered. Said her husband's death had broken her mind. But Ilma hasn't been wrong before. You spend the afternoon at the river, washing hides, shaking out lice, watching the brown water roll and ripple like it always does. It makes no promises, that river. It simply takes. You know the stories of villages upstream that have stopped trading. Too many gone missing. Too many fires seen from a distance. And the strange carvings etched into fallen trees. Faces with no eyes. Evening comes with a slow chill. Smoke curls again from the longhouses. Someone is playing the bone flute. 2 notes, sharp and low, like a call to something that doesn't answer. The goats are inside now, bleeding softly behind the palisade. It's new, that wall, built from the bones of old boats and sharpened branches. Tehu helped raise it last moon. Inside your home, the boy is already asleep. You listen to his breathing, steady, unbroken. Calms you more than fire ever could. You sit at the threshold, knees drawn to your chest, and watch the dark stretch its fingers across the hills. Ilma sits beside you. She doesn't ask to, just sits. "They won't come tonight," she says quietly. You look at her, eyes rimmed with soot, hands still red from dyeing cloth. "How do you know?" She shakes her head. "Because they already came. Somewhere else." She tells you what the traitor didn't. That his arrows weren't broken in a fight. They were taken from bodies and snapped so they couldn't be used again. That means they were left behind. That means no one was left to need them. You don't sleep much. The night is colder than it should be. Somewhere beyond the reeds, the forest breathes, and it sounds, for just a moment, like a cry muffled by dirt. The fire burns low. You place another stick on it, watching sparks drift into the smoke hole above. You think of the old songs, songs about brave men and thunder gods and blood that feeds the earth. You wonder how many of those men are left. Tomorrow, Tehu will go to the high ridge to check the traps. He won't say it, but you know he's looking for tracks, bare feet, broken branches, drag marks. He's looking for signs of those who walk without sound. And you will stay behind. Because someone must protect what little still breathes. Because someone must remember the names of the men already gone. Because someone must be the last voice when the silence finally arrives. You pull the hide tighter around your shoulders and lean back, eyes half closed. There's a rhythm in the wind tonight. It sounds almost like footsteps, but slower, like something taking its time. Something that isn't in a hurry, because it already knows how the story ends. The river knows rumors from the north. The river never lies. It shifts and hides and pulls at roots, but it doesn't lie. You've always believed that. And today, standing barefoot on the pebbled bank, you think maybe the river is trying to tell you something. The current is low, the reeds whispering as if gossiping to each other. And somewhere upstream, something's coming. You don't know what, but it's carried in the driftwood and the silence. The sky is heavy with low clouds, but it hasn't rained. The light is strange, dim and flat, like the world has been covered in ash. Tehu hasn't returned from the ridge. Ilma says not to worry. He walks like a fox, not a hare. But the ache in your ribs says otherwise. By midday, 3 traders arrive from the north. They come in a canoe carved from a split birch, coated in fish oil and smoke. Their arrival is silent. No horn, no call, just the soft scrape of wood on riverbank mud. You spot them first. 1 man rows. 1 man sits behind a bundle of boar hides. The third is smaller, younger, and pale in a way that makes you uncomfortable. His eyes are wide, but he doesn't look at anything directly. You don't like that. They say they've come to trade meat and ochre for grain, but no one misses the way they glance at the palisade, or how their hands hover near the knives at their belts. Elder Vec speaks with them first. He's still loud, still full of that old, arrogant certainty. But you see it now, that tremor in his hand when he gestures. The crack in his voice as he insists, "We're peaceful here." The youngest trader flinches when someone drops a stone by accident. You watch closely. He's the one who speaks first of the rumors. He doesn't say it like a story. He says it like a warning he's trying to spit out before it chokes him. "There's a place," he says, "past the Black Hills, 2 days north of the Wide Bend. We stopped there last moon." He doesn't say the name. Maybe it didn't have one anymore. "There was no smoke," he continues. "No dogs, no shouting. Just quiet. His hands tremble. Not from cold. We thought it was empty. We went inside. You can see his knuckles go white around the hem of his tunic. They didn't burn it. They didn't take the food. They didn't even scatter the tools. He swallows. They just took the men. No one speaks. He goes on, quieter now. 6 huts. Every woman left alive. But the men, he looks down. They were hung by the legs, stripped, marked, skulls placed in a ring around the fire pit. You want to believe he's lying, that it's the kind of story traders tell to avoid fair prices. But he's not looking for pity. He's not even trying to sell it. He's just trying to survive what he saw. That night, the village argues. Some want to pack and leave, head into the forest, become nomads again, as their grandparents once were. Others want to strengthen the wall, double the guards, prepare for the worst. You watch the debate unfold from the shadows. Ilma doesn't speak much, but when she does, the others fall silent. They don't come for your grain, she says. They come for your sons. She points at her own chest. For this we are spared. That truth hangs like smoke. You sleep badly. In the dark, you dream of broken teeth and black arrows. You dream of your son's voice calling out to you, but it's coming from the ground. When you wake, Tehu is back. He's standing over the fire, stirring the ashes with a burnt branch. His face is older somehow, as if the ridge took more than time. He doesn't speak right away, just nods to the pot where someone's boiled willow bark and wild onions. He gestures for you to sit. Then, quietly, he says, "They left marks." You blink, not understanding. "On the rocks," he explains, "near the traps. Symbols I don't know. Circles and claws, carved fresh." You feel a chill crawl along your neck. "Tracks?" you ask. He nods. "Human, barefoot, big, dragging something." You glance toward the longhouse where your son still sleeps. Tehu seems to read your mind. "Not yet," he says, "but they're close." He doesn't offer comfort. He doesn't lie. That evening, the wind shifts. It blows from the north, wet, smelling of pine sap and iron. You don't light a fire in your home that night. You eat cold millet and listen to the trees. The goats refuse to sleep. The next day, Elder Vec announces the building of a second wall. Taller, sharper, with thorns braided into the gaps. The village works fast, sweating in silence. Even the children help, hauling sticks and sharpening stakes. You notice your son copying Tehu's movements, watching him string a bow, practice a spear throw. The boy is barely 10, and already you can see the weight beginning to shape him. At night, you tell him stories, not the old ones about sun gods and golden rivers, but the quiet ones, about how his father used to sing to the barley plants to make them grow straighter, about how his grandmother could tell the weather by the taste of the wind. You want him to remember those things, not just the walls, not just the fear. Another trader comes 5 days later. He carries nothing but a knife and a story. He says he walked through a field of bodies with no hands. He says he saw a girl with a necklace made of teeth. He says they wear masks made from the skulls of those they've taken. And he says they're coming south. Somewhere around that time, the river changes. His voice is louder now, rushing, impatient. The frogs disappear. The fish go deeper. You go to fetch water, and the surface reflects something behind you before you even turn. Just a bird, just a shadow, but your breath stays caught in your chest longer than it should. The men begin taking turns watching at night. They build a small platform above the palisade, just high enough to see the tree line. Tehu volunteers for the first shift. Dren, Ilma's son, joins him. He's 14 now, taller than Tehu already, with a sharp jaw and sad eyes. They don't talk much, but you see them sharing dried apples as the night darkens. You whisper a blessing from your mother's tongue, words you haven't used in years, words that taste like old ash and honey. Then you go inside. You wrap your arms around your son, and you listen, not for footsteps, but for the river. It hasn't lied yet. Of gods and grain, the festival before fire. It's the last warm morning of the season. The barley is dry on the stalk, yellow and golden like the sun itself had fallen and shattered into pieces across the field. The wind hums through it like a lullaby. Birds gather on the rooftops, gossiping over roof thatch and old straw. Even the dogs are quiet, as if they understand that today is not like the others. It's the day of smoke and grain. Your mother used to call it that. A celebration of the harvest, of fertility, of the year's labor bottled into one final day before the cold presses its palm across the land. No matter what else had happened, whether your roof had leaked or your calf had died, it was a day for laughter. And this year, the village needs it more than ever. Preparations begin before dawn. You are sent to gather the last bundles of mint and oxeye daisy. Tehu sharpens the adze for the ceremonial pig. The children chase each other with wreaths of damp grass around their heads, giggling like they've forgotten the past moon's silence. For now, they are just children again. You let them be. You sweep the dirt floor of your home 3 times. Once for the gods, once for the dead, once for yourself. A tradition older than the village itself. No one knows who started it. No one questions it. By midday, the scent of crushed juniper berries and burning straw fills the air. The old drums come out. Tan deer hides stretched over hollowed stumps, tied with rawhide, painted in red ochre spirals. You haven't heard them in weeks. When the beat begins, it thumps softly through your chest like a second heartbeat. Familiar, steady. Ilma wears a necklace of river shells today. She's carved tiny lines into each one, almost like tally marks. You ask her what they count. Things I've survived, she replies simply. Tehu, too, looks different, clean-shaven, his old hunting tunic mended for once. He has feathers tied into his braids, black and white like the crow's wings that circle above the smoke. He doesn't smile, not exactly, but he's quieter than usual in a way that feels like reverence, not dread. You wonder how long it will last. By the fire pit, the elders arrange their offerings. Bundles of dried roots, fermented milk in sealed jugs, clay bowls of honey and insects, carved stones believed to hold ancestral spirits. One bowl is passed hand to hand. You're told to whisper your wish into the steam before it reaches the flames. You whisper nothing, because what you want you cannot have. The feast begins at dusk. There's goat stew thickened with millet and mushroom, and flat cakes smeared with riverberry paste. Smoke curls upward into the darkening sky, where stars blink into existence one by one. You chew slowly, savoring each mouthful like it might be the last good food you taste before snow or war. The men drink fermented barley, sharp and yeasty. The young ones shout challenges over a fire, wrestling shirtless in the dust. You watch Ilma's son, Dren, pin a boy half again his size with a grin that doesn't reach his eyes. They cheer anyway. Tehu sits with the elders, but his eyes scan the tree line. Always, you know better than to relax completely. But part of you tries, because tonight, for a moment, the world feels like it used to. Before stories of skull circles and headless men, before broken arrows and sleeping with a knife under the hide blanket. Tonight, there is music. A bone flute is passed to the youngest girl in the village. She's maybe 7, with a crooked tooth and a laugh like birdsong. She plays badly. No one minds. Next comes the storytelling. The oldest woman still living, Aru, with hands like bark and breath that whistles through missing teeth, tells the tale of the mother of crows. How she tricked the sun into staying high so the crops would ripen, only to steal it away when men grew too proud. Aru acts out the crow's dancing legs with her wrinkled fingers. The children howl with laughter. Then a traveler stands. He's not from your village. He came with a bundle of obsidian blades 3 days ago, and no one asked where he came from because he brought useful things and spoke softly. But now he clears his throat and begins a tale. It's not a funny one. There were once 5 brothers, he says, staring into the fire, all sons of the same man, born of different mothers, raised in the same valley. You shift, uncomfortable. They grew tall, strong. They built homes, fished, bred goats. Then one winter, the youngest found a cave in the hills, filled with skulls, dozens, arranged in a ring. The fire pops loudly. A few children jump. One skull had black teeth, he continues, Another was cracked like a melon. All were staring upward. He pauses. None of the brothers spoke of it. They sealed the cave and planted grain above it. But from that season on, they could not bear sons. Only daughters. And when a son did come, he bled from the eyes and died before his 2nd year. The traveler's voice drops. The skulls were old, but they remembered. No one claps. No one laughs. The drums don't start again right away. A silence follows. It stretches too long. You reach instinctively for your son's shoulder. He looks up at you with wide, uncertain eyes. You nod once. Safe. Just a story. That's all. But then you glance over at Ilma. She isn't smiling. She's staring at the traveler. Hard. And her lips are moving. Not a curse. Prayer. Later that night, after the fires die down and the embers turn to ash, you and Tehu carry your sleeping son back inside. The stars are dimmed by a thin veil of cloud. The air smells of sweat and char and something faintly bitter. Maybe wormwood. Tehu doesn't speak as he lays the boy down, tucking the hide around him like it's the last soft thing left in the world. You stand together in the doorway, watching the last of the village settle in for the night. Someone coughs. A dog barks once, then quiets, then nothing. You hear it first. A soft rustle at the edge of the forest. Not wind, not birds, something else. You and Tehu both freeze. Your hands find each other's without thinking. Nothing moves, but you know it's there. Waiting, watching. Not tonight, but soon. And then he was gone. Tehu leaves before dawn. You don't hear him rise. He slips out silently, the way he always moved when he hunted. Part wind, part shadow, all silence. By the time you wake, his sleeping mat is cold. His bone-handled knife is gone. The thick spear with the stone tip that hangs above the doorway? Missing. He didn't say goodbye. Not to you, not to your son. Not even to Ilma, who watches the forest like it owes her an answer she's never been given. He went to the West Ridge, she says, wrapping dried thistle into tight bunches for the smoke basket. Said he saw something there 2 nights ago. Ash where there should be moss. Bones picked too clean. You feel your stomach tighten. Not fear. Not exactly. More like the slow sinking weight of knowing something is happening, and that your place in it is passive. The watchers in the village are on edge. The older boys, like Dren and Laka, have taken to patrolling near the goat pen. One of them swears he saw a footprint near the river. Too large. The toes long. Spread wide like someone had walked without shoes for too long. Someone, or something. That's the part no one says aloud. Not yet. You spend the morning boiling bitter root and stripping willow bark for the healer's salve. The work is slow and repetitive, just enough to keep your mind busy but never quiet. Every noise makes you flinch. The call of the crows, the rustle of dry grass. Even your own son's laughter sounds strange now. Too sharp, too hopeful for a world like this. At midday, a group of women returns from the berry woods with less than half their baskets filled. One of them, Mara, says she saw a circle of blackened stones arranged at the base of a tree. Like a fire pit, she whispers. But no ash, no coals, just marks, and something left behind. You press her. It was a rabbit, dead, with its fur peeled back and its eyes replaced by tiny shells. Later, you find yourself near the palisade wall, fingers idly tracing the rough bark. The wall is taller now, reinforced with bundles of thorn branches and dried pitch, but it still feels too thin, like it would break the moment something truly terrible pushed against it. You speak with Elder Vec. He waves a hand at the sun. There's no enemy, he says, only the fear of one. You don't bother to argue, not because he's right, but because he's too old to change. He remembers a world that no longer exists, a world where men traded stories, not skulls. Tehu doesn't return by sunset. You wait by the fire, hands wrapped around your son's shoulders. He eats his stew quietly tonight without questions. He knows something is wrong. Ilma joins you, her legs crackling as she sits on the mat. She doesn't ask about Tehu. She just pulls a carved figure from her pouch. An old wooden goddess with a cracked base and a piece of deer sinew wrapped around the waist. She used to be buried near every hearth, Ilma says. Kept the sun strong, kept the shadows out. You stare at the figure's face. It's been worn smooth by years of handling. No eyes, no mouth, just the faint outline of a nose. Do you believe in her still? You ask. Ilma shrugs. I believe she was once real. I believe she remembers what it felt like when the world still made sense. There's no ceremony that night. No music, just quiet. Even the insects seem to have left the village. At midnight, you're woken by the horn. It's low and broken. One short blast, then silence. Not the full 3 blasts they agreed would mean attack, but still urgent. You scramble outside, heart thudding in your ears. Dren stands near the northern post. His face is pale, his hand shaking around the haft of his spear. I heard something, he says. In the woods. What kind of something? He swallows hard. It wasn't an animal. Other villagers gather. Ilma stands beside you. A few men climb the platform, scanning the tree line with torches. The firelight flickers along the spikes of the palisade. The woods are dark. Still, nothing moves. Then Dren points. There. You follow his gaze. At the edge of the forest, just between 2 tall alders, something glints. A shape, round, white, bone, is gone in a blink. Someone curses. Another man fumbles his torch and drops it into the dry grass. But no one moves beyond the wall. No one dares. You stay awake the rest of the night. Tehu does not come back. By morning, the sky has changed. The clouds are lower, heavier. The air smells wrong, like copper and wet ash. They send 2 men to the west ridge. Only one returns. His voice is flat. We found his basket, split down the middle. You ask him, and the body? He looks away. There wasn't one. Later, you walk alone to the edge of the field. The barley has been cut, but the stumps remain. Stiff little fingers poking up through the dirt. You kneel down, letting your hands brush over the broken stalks. You remember the way Tehu used to whisper to the wind before a hunt. How he never spoke of killing, only borrowing from the land. You remember the way he never looked back when he walked away. And you realize something terrifying. No one who's left this village in the last 3 moons has returned whole. Some come back with broken minds, others not at all. The silence that surrounds them feels intentional. Not the result of distance or bad luck, but design. Like something is selecting, and it does not choose women. The children begin whispering again. They talk about the tall ones who live in the hills. They draw figures in the dust. Figures with stretched limbs and blank faces. One child says they saw a man walking backward into the forest with his hands tied above his head. Another dreams of laughter that sounds like knives. Ilma tries to keep order. She organizes firewood, checks the grain storage, instructs the boys on spear drills. But something in her eyes has shifted. She used to be iron. Now she is iron covered in rust. One night you find her crying. Not loudly, not desperately, just quiet, steady tears that run down her face like water from a cracked gourd. You don't say anything. You just sit beside her, and together you watch the fire fade to embers. And when the coals go dark, neither of you gets up to rekindle it. Because you both know, Tehu is gone. Not just missing. Gone in the way the old gods are gone. Gone like summer rain after the frost. Gone in a way that leaves no trace but fear. The war without a name. They came just after dusk. Not with horns. Not with fire. Not like you feared. They came like the wind comes through the trees. Quiet, almost soft, and suddenly all around you. It started with a dog. Old Mev's dog. The one with the limp and milky eye. It let out a single high-pitched yelp and then nothing. Silence so thick you could hear your own heartbeat. You were stirring a pot of barley and mushrooms when it happened. Your son was tracing circles in the ash with a stick, humming to himself. The dog didn't bark again. When you stepped outside, the wind had stopped. The smoke from the fires hung in the air like it had forgotten how to rise. The goats huddled together, heads down, unmoving. The forest, always alive, always crackling, chirping, rustling, was dead quiet. Someone shouted. Then another voice, sharp and high, panicked. You grabbed your son by the wrist and ran for the central hearth. That's when the screaming started. Not battle screams, not war cries, just screams, like flesh being opened, like bones snapping under teeth, like someone realizing too late that they were already dying. The world spun. Ilma met you at the hearth, blood streaked across her arm, her eyes wild but clear. To the wall, she snapped. You didn't ask questions. You ran. The palisade gate was open. Someone had fled or someone had failed. Either way, it was useless now. Smoke clung to everything, curling through the gaps in the sharpened wood. Someone had thrown up from fear or pain. You weren't sure, but the air smelled of bile and burnt fat. You saw Dren, Ilma's son, dragging a wounded man by the shoulders, teeth clenched so tight his jaw looked broken. The man's leg was nearly gone below the knee, just strings of red and cracked bone. No one was fighting. They were just trying to run. And still, you hadn't seen them. The ones who came. Not clearly. Only flashes between huts. A blur of gray skin. A glint of something sharp. A shape too tall, moving with an unnatural grace. A silhouette that ducked under the eaves and disappeared before you could draw breath. And then, finally, eyes. 2 of them. Set wide apart, glowing faintly like embers pressed into wet ash. They looked at you and did not blink. You moved. You didn't remember making the decision, but your legs carried you to the store hut. You shoved your son inside and barred the door with a wooden plank meant to hold grain sacks. He was crying. You pressed your hand to his mouth, not gently. Quiet, you hissed. He nodded. Outside, something brushed the wall. You heard wood creak, and then footsteps, not rushed, not stomping, just deliberate, like something that didn't need to hurry because it knew you had nowhere to go. You held your breath. The footsteps passed. When you dared peek through the thatch crack, what you saw didn't make sense. 3 figures, barefoot, naked from the waist up. Their skin was gray-blue in the torchlight, covered in what looked like mud or dried blood. Their arms were long, longer than yours, and their hands hung like broken tools. Around their necks were strings of bones. They didn't speak. They just moved from house to house. And when they found men, they dragged them out. Not all killed. Some were simply taken. You didn't know what was worse. When morning came, they were gone. Just like that. Gone. The gate was still open. The watchtower had collapsed. 1/3 of the huts were burning. The rest looked like they'd been gnawed on. There were no bodies. Not a single one. Only blood. Drag marks. Tools scattered like the people who held them had vanished mid-motion. The elders gathered what was left of the village. Fewer than 30 now. Of the men, only 5 remained. One of them could no longer speak. Another had wet himself and sat in the ashes of his home, staring at nothing. You held your son tighter than you ever had. Ilma stood tall among the ruin. She didn't cry, didn't tremble. She said, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." No one understood then, but she was right, because what came next wasn't safety. It was a name. You didn't give it to them. Names give shape to things. Names grant understanding. And there was no understanding what they were. But the children began calling them the Dark Ones, because they came at dusk, because they made the fires go out, because their faces had no expression, no joy, no anger, just cold indifference. And because they always took the men. A week passed. You and the survivors buried what you could find. Bits of cloth, pieces of teeth, broken tools that still held blood. You found Tehu's knife in the woods, stuck in a tree. No tracks nearby. No body. Just the knife placed upright like a mark. Ilma sent messengers to nearby villages. 2 returned. Both told the same story. They're everywhere now. Burnt circles in the grass. Skulls in trees. And fewer men. The walls went higher. Spears were sharpened again and again until the points broke off. The hunters no longer hunted. The fields were left half-tilled. The goats stopped breeding. The boy, your son, asked if he could hold a knife. You said no. Then yes, because if they came again, he would need it. The elders debated whether to leave. Ilma said no. "If we run, we scatter," she said. "If we scatter, we vanish." She was right. The second attack came during a storm. No one remembers much. Only that by morning 2 more men were gone. No women, no children, only men. And then someone did the math. From the western hills to the river valleys in the east, messengers came with the same pattern. The women lived. The men vanished. Always more women left. Always fewer sons born. The war had no name, no side to fight against. Only the silence of missing fathers. Some said it was punishment. Some said it was gods returning for what was theirs. Others, like Ilma, said it was neither. "They're not gods," she whispered. "They're people. Changed, yes, but people." You asked her, "Then why do they only take men?" Ilma didn't answer for a long time. Finally, she said, "Because men are the ones who carry war." And she walked away. That night, your son fell asleep with a knife beneath his blanket. You didn't stop him. You watched the stars instead. And you realized something horrible. There would be no songs about this. No legends. No great victories. Just missing names. Just broken tools. Just the slow, quiet collapse of something older than memory. The beginning of a story that no one would tell. Because no one would be left to remember. And still, you held your son close. Because that's all you could do. Because the war had begun. And it had no name. Chapter 2, Into the Fire. The winds are colder now. The breath of the earth itself feels tight in your chest. The war without a name has taken shape. Not in declarations, but in absences. In the silence where laughter used to be. In the walls raised not to mark territory, but to hold back ghosts. Let the smoke rise gently, we continue. Walls made of hope. The wall is your prayer now. Each stake you hammer into the earth feels like a whispered plea. One not spoken in words, but in sweat and splinters and blood. It doesn't matter that the wall won't hold them if they come again. What matters is that it gives people something to believe in. Something to do with their hands instead of wringing them in helplessness. You've never built a fortification before. No one had. Walls used to be for keeping goats in. For keeping children from wandering too far into the trees. Now they are sharpened at the top, smeared with pitch, and lined with thorns scavenged from the far side of the gorge. You lash branches until your hands blister. You dig trenches until your arms feel like they'll fall off. And you're not alone. Every woman, every child above 7, every boy who no longer waits for his father to return. They all help. Ilma organizes the work like a war chief. She stopped wearing jewelry. Her voice is harder, her words fewer. She counts food by the day now, not the moon. When someone cries, she doesn't comfort them. She hands them a shovel. Dren has taken to walking the perimeter every morning and every night. He ties red feathers to the topmost stakes. So they know we're watching, he says. You think maybe it's really to remind himself that someone still is. The nights are colder now. The smoke hangs lower in the huts. The fire smells like desperation and pine sap. Your son sleeps with the knife still under his blanket. He hasn't laughed in 4 days. You catch him once sitting outside the longhouse, whispering to something in his hands. It's a piece of wood he carved, a crude figure. A man with no face. What's that? You ask. He shrugs. It's no one. You don't ask again. You start seeing shapes in the trees. You tell yourself it's nothing. That fear makes you imagine. That every snap twig and owl call is just the forest doing what forests do. But part of you knows better. They're watching, not attacking, not yet, just watching. And you get the sick feeling that it's a game to them, that they're waiting for you to stop building, waiting for someone to open the gate again, waiting for hope to shrink just enough to fit a knife between the ribs. Then one night something changes. You wake to the sound of singing. It's soft, fragile, a woman's voice, cracked with age. The words are old, older than the village, sung in a tongue you only remember from the lips of your grandmother. You follow the sound to the central hearth, where Aru, the bent old woman with bark for hands, is singing to a bundle of reeds tied with cord. She notices you but doesn't stop. Others gather slowly, not to interrupt, just to listen. No one sung in weeks, maybe moons. You forgot what it sounded like when someone wasn't begging or screaming. When she finishes, no one speaks. She smiles with missing teeth. "We used to sing to the walls," she says, "to remind them who they protect." You nod, and the next day you sing too, low and quiet, not for celebration, but for memory. For the men who didn't return. For Tehu. For all of them. The wall rises. It's taller now, almost the height of two tall men. You reinforce it with dirt and packed moss. You begin sharpening bone tips into spears. There's talk of making traps, holes with spikes hidden beneath leaves. It's a terrible idea, but no one dares say so. Desperation makes all plans seem clever. Dren finds an old man from a nearby hill clan. Says his name is Sham. Says he survived a raid weeks ago. Sham doesn't speak much. He shows you something, though. A scar. Runs down his back from shoulder to hip. "It wasn't a blade," he croaks. "It was teeth." You don't ask more. You don't need to. That same day, Ilma finds bones on the far edge of the barley field. Not buried. Arranged. Two femurs crossed. A jawbone placed between them. Hollow reeds stuck upright into the dirt like antennae. She doesn't say a word. Just crushes it under her boot. By now, the dreams have started. You dream of Tehu, but it's not him. Not really. He stands at the edge of your bedroll, silent, dripping. His eyes are missing. You wake with a scream you catch in your teeth. Your son wakes too. He doesn't ask what's wrong. He just places his small hand in yours. You think he dreamt it too. That same week, another village burns. You see the smoke from the ridge. Dren takes two others to scout. They return hollow-eyed, covered in soot, carrying the only survivor. A girl no older than 9. She doesn't speak for 3 days. When she finally does, she says only, "They didn't kill everyone." "What do you mean?" Ilma asks her gently. "They took the ones who fought. And the others?" She swallows hard. "They made them watch. A brother's price." The first boy they offered was named Kuno. He came from the East Bend, the long village with red clay ovens and river reed mats. They arrived at dusk, 3 women, 2 children, and Kuno, bearing gifts of roasted goat, barley bundles, and 2 woven tunics dyed deep green. "We want to join the wall," the eldest woman said, not quite meeting Ilma's eyes. You recognized her. She traded fish oil for flint with you 2 springs ago. Back then, she had 2 sons. Now, only Kuno stood behind her, tall and too lean, maybe 16. He held a carved stick in his hand. Not a spear, not quite a weapon. Ilma studied them for a long moment before she stepped aside. Kuno did not speak, just followed his mother quietly into the village, shoulders straight. But later that night, you saw him crying behind the grain shed. Not loud, not desperate, just silent tears, wiped away with the back of a trembling hand. That was the first time. The second came 2 days later. Another group, another boy, different faces, same message. "We have a son. Let him guard your wall. Let him marry one of your daughters. Let him be counted." And each time, Ilma said nothing at first, then nodded. You started calling them the bargain sons. By the end of the week, there were 5. Your son watched them from the smokehouse roof, eyes narrowed. He was 11 now. His hands had calluses. His voice was starting to crack. You hadn't noticed until one night he asked if he could join Dren on a watch patrol. You said no. He didn't argue, but you caught him practicing anyway, throwing sticks like spears at the goat pen posts, whispering to himself, mimicking Dren's stance, trying to become the thing that didn't die. You didn't stop him. You weren't sure you could. Ilma gathered the elders that evening. "The balance has shifted," she said, drawing lines in the dirt. "Too few men. Too many mothers. If this continues, the clans will break." Elder Vec, one of the last original men still walking, scoffed. "Better to die as we are than trade our daughters like river stones." Ilma's stare turned him to silence. "You'd rather we die forgotten? We will die either way." Ilma didn't flinch. "Then let us choose how." That night, a decision was made. Every son older than 12 would be trained. Every daughter older than 10 would be offered a choice: remain or be paired with a bargain son, if she wished it. Most remained, some paired, none left, because there was nowhere else to go. The walls were not just physical anymore. They were in the minds of the people now, in the way they huddled together at dusk, in the way they counted firewood and dried fish, in the way they stopped speaking of the future. Your son, after a long silence, asked you, "Will I have to fight?" You paused, then said, "Only if the wall breaks." He nodded like he already knew, but he still asked you to tie a charm around his wrist, just like Tehu used to wear. You found an old bone bead in the ash heap and strung it onto a thread of woven grass. It wasn't much, but he held it like a sword. The bargain sons trained with Dren now. They were fast learners, not strong yet but eager, eyes alert, too old to be children, too young to be ready. One of them, Jal from the highland trees, had a sister who followed him everywhere. She was no more than 6, but she sang to herself as she wandered, half wild and barefoot. You found her once near the old fire circle, collecting beetles and bones. She looked up at you and said, "My brother's going to kill a ghost." You didn't correct her, because it was easier than explaining that ghosts don't bleed. The forest remained quiet, too quiet. No animals moved, no birds sang. Even the insects seemed to vanish. You spoke to Sham, the scarred elder who had once escaped an attack. He spat into the fire and said, "They're circling." You asked him what he meant. "They wait, like wolves, but not hungry, just cruel." You didn't sleep much after that. Ilma began marking the gates with handprints, blackened with charcoal, pressed into the wood like old spirits trying to hold the entrance shut. It didn't make you feel safer, but it did feel like something. The bargain sons began patrolling further each night. Sometimes they found nothing. Sometimes they found signs. One morning, they returned with pieces of a fire pit, stones arranged in spirals, burned bones that weren't animal, a bracelet made from braided hair. That was the night the council decided to burn the eastern huts. Too exposed, too vulnerable. Better to have fewer shelters than leave space for shadows. The smoke curled up into the sky the next morning, black and silent. You watched it from the edge of the wall, your son beside you. He said, "Will they burn us too?" You said, "Not if we hold the line." He nodded and whispered, "Then I'll never blink." Later that evening, Dren held a training session in the cleared yard. He lined the bargain sons up and had them throw spears at sacks filled with ash and crushed bone. Only 2 hit their marks. Dren didn't shout. He didn't correct. He just said, "When they come, you'll only have 1 throw. If it misses, run. If you can't run, scream. Loud. So we know where to find what's left." You watched the boys stare at him, and you saw it. Not fear, not even hate, but the slow, heavy settling of a truth they could not escape. The wall grew higher still, but hope, you feared, was not keeping up. Blood in the grass, the Schletz slaughter. You didn't see it yourself, but Dren did, and when he spoke of it, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't weep. He didn't even blink. That made it worse. It had started with a column of smoke on the far horizon, where the hills meet the low plains. A new settlement, Schletz, one of the many that had sprung up in recent seasons. You had never been there, but you'd traded with them. They had salt, fine stone tools, and sons. For days before, they had sent word. 2 young men to train as defenders, and a girl with a broken arm to seek healing. The girl never arrived, so Ilma sent Dren. He took 2 bargain sons and Sham, the scarred elder. They left at dawn, promised to return by 3rd sun. When they did, they came back alone. No girl, no sons, no Sham, and the blood that ran down Dren's legs wasn't his. He sat by the hearth without speaking for a long time. Then finally, they didn't fight. You waited, breath still, fire low. They didn't have time. He began to talk, and as he did, you felt something twist in your gut, like a knot being pulled tighter with every word. "There was no smoke left when we got close, just the smell. You know the one. You did. Burned hair, rotten marrow, wet ash and blood turned sweet from the sun. The palisade was broken, like someone peeled it back. Not smashed, peeled, like an eggshell pulled away in halves. Dren's hands shook as he spoke. We found them in the field. All of them. You asked, how many? Maybe 200, maybe more, piled. Some were still warm. He didn't describe the bodies at first. You didn't press him. He continued, there were no women. That chilled you deeper than the rest. And the children? He shook his head. Too small to carry, maybe, or taken. What about Sham? Dren's jaw tensed. He walked into one of the huts, saw something. We heard him scream. He never screamed. We found him outside on his knees, eyes wide, mouth full of dirt. He'd bitten through his tongue, bled out in minutes. Dren looked up at Ilma then. There was something written on the inside wall, in blood. She asked, what did it say? He paused, and then, no sons, no fire, no names. You sat down slowly. The fire popped. Someone outside shouted at a goat. Life tried to continue, but inside something broke. No sons, no fire, no names. 3 truths now proven again. Ilma rose and left without speaking. You didn't see her again until morning. That night no one slept. Even the wind kept still. The next day, Dren returned to the field, dug a hole with his bare hands and buried the necklace he had found among the ashes. Woven bone beads, one carved with a circle inside a triangle. Not a charm, a warning. The Bargain sons didn't ask questions after that. They trained harder, drilled until their hands bled and their shoulders failed. One collapsed near the forge and vomited bile. Dren didn't tell him to rest, just said, that means your body still works. Use it. Your son stopped playing games. He watched Dren constantly now, mimicked his stance, his breathing, the way he gripped the spear. You tried to stop him once, but he looked at you, not with rebellion, but resolve. I don't want to be taken, he said. I want to stand. You said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Schlitz was only one. Other messengers came, whispers of other fields, other stacks of bodies, other names being erased. One trader from the west described a tree strung with skulls, each missing its jaw. It sings when the wind comes, he said, trembling, like bone flutes. Another described a village with doors left open and bowls of food still warm, abandoned mid-meal. They didn't run, he said. They were just taken. Everywhere the same pattern. No men returned, no boys older than 10, and always no fire, as if the attackers feared warmth, or despised it, or had simply evolved beyond the need for it. Ilma began painting the outer wall with crushed berry and ash, symbols from her grandmother's chants. She said they were meant to blind spirits, or at least confuse them. Felt like superstition, but no one stopped her. Not anymore, because something had shifted. This was no longer survival. This was remembrance. Remembrance of a time when you didn't flinch at footfalls, when you didn't count your neighbors every morning, when a boy could dream of hunting stags, not ghosts. The war had no general, no banners, no speeches, just the silent knowledge that your village might be next. The Bargain sons began sleeping in shifts. Your son asked to join them. You refused. He snuck out anyway. You found him beside Dren, spear in hand, eyes closed but alert, like a wolf, like someone grown too quickly. You didn't scold him. You simply sat next to him and said, if they come, you stay beside me. He didn't argue. He just leaned into you and whispered, if they come, I'll scream loud, so you know where to find what's left. The way Dren taught them. And that night, as the wind stirred the trees like old fingers shaking a curtain, you whispered a name to the dark. Not Tehu, not Ilma, not even your son. Just a name you hadn't spoken in years. Your brothers, taken in a raid before all of this began. Before you knew what the war even was. You remembered how he smiled, how he made you laugh, and then how no one found him. No fire, no bones, no name, just absence. And now you understood. That was how they won. Not by killing, but by making memory itself impossible. 3 spears at dawn. They came with the fog. Not a full assault. Just a whisper at the edge of morning. Enough to test the wall. Enough to taste fear. You had barely stirred the coals when the first shout rang out. Dren's voice, sharp and cutting through the mist like a blade. North wall! Up! Wake them! You grabbed your son's shoulder before he was fully upright. Stay behind me, you hissed. But he was already reaching for the spear he'd kept by the door for 3 weeks. You didn't argue. There wasn't time. Outside, the village was awake but scattered. Shapes moved in the fog, some human, some not. You knew your people by the way they ran, the sound of their breath. But the others were wrong. Too quiet, too fast, and never together, like shadows moving between the cracks of the world. You raced toward the palisade, heart thudding. Ilma stood near the watch platform, bow drawn, eyes narrow. Her white braid hung like rope down her back. Dren was already there, face slick with dew, a thin line of blood across his forehead. They're probing, he muttered. Not attacking, just testing. You scanned the outer fields. Nothing moved now, just fog, and the silence after adrenaline. The kind of silence that presses hard behind your ears. Then you saw it. 3 shapes, at the tree line, still, watching. They didn't run, didn't move, just stood there. You couldn't make out details, only that they were tall, unnaturally so. One had something hanging from its hand, a chain of what looked like jawbones, still strung with dried sinew. Your stomach turned. Ilma raised her bow but didn't release. They're not here for a fight, she whispered. Dren agreed. They're marking us, seeing who will stand. You asked, should we strike first? No, Ilma said. They want us to. And she turned her back on them. That was the first time. The second time was different. 2 days later, with no warning, they came again. But this time, they breached. They chose the weakest point, the southern bend where the thorns hadn't been replaced, where the logs had begun to rot from weeks of wet fog and cold nights. They knew. Of course they knew. Dren was on the west side. You were tending the smokehouse. Ilma had gone to the creek with a small group to check the traps. They waited for that. 3 entered. Only 3. That's all it took. You heard the screams before you saw them. By the time you reached the breach, one of the bargain sons lay on the ground. Neck twisted, eyes open, spear still in hand. Another was gone. No trail, no blood, just gone. The third Jal was still alive. He stood over the body, breathing hard, shaking. His blade was slick, but his eyes were blank. Where are they? You asked. He shook his head. They didn't run. They just slipped. You didn't understand. Until you saw the mud. Not footprints. Not drag marks. Just deep impressions in the earth. Like something had stood still, then vanished. Like a deer's final step before a trap closes. Ilma returned as you were preparing the dead. She said nothing, just looked at the bodies, and then at the forest. Later that night, she called a gathering. Everyone came, even the old ones who rarely left their beds, even the children, because they had to hear. She stood near the fire and held up 3 objects. A stone knife, a broken bone flute, and a single black feather. These are the things they leave, she said. Symbols, reminders, curses, maybe. She dropped them into the fire. We will not honor them. We will not speak their names. She looked out across the faces. But we will fight. A murmur passed through the crowd. Ilma continued. No more hiding behind walls. No more waiting for shadows. From now on, we strike when they do. We mark our dead. We burn their symbols. And we scream. She looked at your son, who stood near Dren. You scream, she said, because they hate sound. They hate fire. They hate being named. Her voice rose. So name them. Burn them. Fight them. You watched the people straighten their backs. Even the old ones nodded. Even the bargain sons raised their heads. And the next morning you saw something strange. 3 spears planted in the ground outside the southern wall, wrapped in bark, tied with feathers. Dren stared at them for a long time, then knocked them over and threw them into the pit. They didn't burn. The next raid came not in silence, but in fury. You were ready this time. 3 entered again, always 3. But this time you met them at the breach. Dren, Jel, your son. 3 spears at dawn. The moment they came, your people rose like the fire Ilma promised. Screams filled the air. Not fear, war cries. Jal struck first, his blade biting deep into something pale and sinewed. It shrieked, an awful, high-pitched sound like a whistle made of bone. Dren followed. The third one tried to grab your son. You saw it, a blur of motion. Too fast, too tall. But your son ducked, screamed, loud. The creature flinched. Just enough for you to drive your stone axe into its thigh. It didn't bleed. It hissed, backhanded you. You hit the earth hard. But Dren was already there, and the second spear found its mark. They didn't kill all 3. 1 escaped, but 2 stayed down. And when you burned the bodies, this time they caught fire. Dark smoke, sweet and sour, the smell of marrow and death. And something else, like rotted moss and honey left too long. You didn't sleep that night. None of you did, because you knew it wasn't over. But it was the first time they didn't win. And in the morning, you painted red lines on the outer wall. 3 lines, 3 spears, a warning, or a promise. Either way, they saw it. And for the next 3 days, they didn't come. The map of bones. It started with a jawbone, found just beyond the creek. Deliberately placed, clean of flesh, set upright in the mud like a marker. Carved into the underside was a small, perfect spiral. Jal found it during morning patrol. He didn't touch it, just stood over it, breathing hard, until you and Dren arrived. Ilma came later. She stared at it for a long time, then knelt and carefully turned the bone over with a stick. She didn't speak, but her face said enough. It was human, adult, male, another. That night, you stayed up beside the fire, waiting for her to speak. Finally, she did. They're mapping us. You frowned. How? Bones, she said. Bones and signs. That's how they mark territory. You asked how she knew. She looked down at her palms, at the lines that crossed them like dry rivers. My grandmother told stories, she murmured, of men who vanished, of bones left like messages. I thought they were myths. They're not, you whispered. No, she said. They never were. The next morning, the boy who'd gone with Jal found another one. This time, a femur, wrapped in animal hide and tied with river weed. Another spiral, another marker. You dug a hole and buried it. 2 days later, 3 more markers appeared, along the western trail just outside the goat pen and at the edge of the barley field. You didn't speak of it aloud, but everyone knew. The village was being surrounded. You called them signs, but your son called them something else. A map. You paused. A map of what? Of who they've taken, he said. You looked at him. His face had grown sharper in the last month. His hands steadier. There was no fear in his voice now, only understanding. They're counting, he said. And we're next. That night, Ilma gathered the defenders and drew a circle in the dirt. Every village in the basin has seen them, she said. Not one has returned a man. She marked dots with pebbles, places she traded with, places the traders had named. You recognized some. Others were unfamiliar. Out of 20, only 6 remained. Yours among them. She pointed to the missing. All gone, she said. Some without a sound. Others with screams we still hear. Then she picked up a deer bone and pressed it into the earth just outside your village's dot. They're closing in. You didn't sleep that night. Again. At dawn, the messenger arrived. He wasn't expected, and he wasn't well. His name was Tyam, from the southern coast, where the rivers met the stone cliffs and the air smelled of salt and moss. He stumbled through the gate, barefoot and bleeding from the knees. He carried no weapons, only a pouch filled with tiny carved stones. Ilma met him first. He fell to his knees and whispered, "They're changing. You gathered around as he poured the stones onto the dirt. Each bore a mark, a spiral, a broken line, a circle with a bite taken out of it. He pointed to each and named the village it once represented. They took them, all of them, but now they leave parts, messages. He opened the pouch again and pulled out a finger bone, tied with red sinew, scratched with notches. Counting, he said again. They are counting, and they are selecting. Ilma asked him, "Why did they let you live?" He shook. "I watched," he said. "They wanted me to watch." That night, Ilma marked the entire inside of the wall with chalk and soot. Circles, triangles, handprints, symbols from old chants, protection glyphs, river charms. It didn't matter whether they worked. People believed in them, and belief was armor now. 3 days passed without attack. 3 days with no signs, no bones, no footprints. You began to wonder if maybe they had moved on. Then, on the 4th day, Jal found a skull. On the ridge, still damp, carved with your village's name, phonetically scrawled, but unmistakable. You brought it to Ilma. She held it in both hands, whispered something, then passed it to you. It was not someone you recognized, not a bargain son, not a traitor, just another man, another father, brother, hunter, farmer. Erased. The skull bore the spiral on its crown. And something new, a straight line etched from crown to jaw. Dren examined it and said, "They're tracking bloodlines." No one responded, because you all knew he was right. 2 days later, a traveler arrived with something worse. Proof. He carried a shard of wood with hundreds of notches carved into the surface, lines and clusters, organized by height, age, and what he claimed were markings for tribal features. "They're not just killing," he said. "They're pruning." Ilma asked what that meant. "They're choosing who stays." Your son looked up from the fire. "And who disappears?" You remembered the old stories of Neolithic clans, of sudden vanishing lineages, of how entire male bloodlines vanished without a trace from the genetic memory of humankind. Now you understood. The Y chromosome bottleneck. It wasn't a mystery. It was a strategy. And you were living inside it. The map was real. The bones were markers. And your son was a number on their list. Chapter 3. The Cult of Skulls. Let the wind still around you. Let the fire burn low and the night deepen. You've come far, from harvest songs and riverbred to spears, bone signs, and names carved into skulls. What comes now is no longer a war. It is a ritual, pattern. You follow the bones to where it all began. Welcome to Herxheim. You arrive at Herxheim at the edge of dusk. It isn't a village anymore. Not really. More like the idea of one. Half swallowed by the land, choked with the bones of the forgotten, ringed with pits like open mouths. The wind doesn't blow here. It doesn't dare. And yet, the smell carries on the air. Old blood, clay, charred marrow. The walk took 3 days, and each night the fires burned smaller. The closer you came, the more your skin prickled, like it knew something your bones didn't. The boy Ashu is with you, one of the few who came back from the last village that tried to stand. He's only 12, but he walks like he's already lived 2 lives. And in some way, he has. You see it in his eyes when he looks across the outer trench, where the skulls are still planted on stakes. Some are cracked down the middle. Others still have bits of hair clinging to the crown. None of them are fresh, but none of them are old enough. Dren doesn't speak. He walks ahead, blade in hand, eyes locked on the central pit. Ilma stops beside you and exhales slowly. "This is where they fed," she says. You don't ask what that means, because you already know. The first thing you notice isn't the bones. It's the quiet. No birds, no insects, not even wind through grass. Just the crunch of your steps over old dirt and the sound of your own breath. Herxheim had walls once. You see their remnants, old palisade posts, long since blackened by fire or rot, arranged in a pattern too tight to be random. Inside the perimeter there are pits, dozens, lined up like ritual scars. Some still hold fragments of tools, others bones. So many bones. You try not to count. But your mind does anyway. Femurs, tibias, fingers too small to belong to adults. You find one pit that holds only hands. 23 of them, laid in a circle, palms up. Ashu doesn't flinch. He simply points toward the largest pit at the center. They did it there, he says. The heads, the splitting. You follow, and there it is. The great pit, wider than a longhouse, deeper than your reach, filled halfway with bones, skulls mostly, many broken in symmetrical halves, as if cracked intentionally. You see burn marks, scrape lines, knife scoring. You see holes drilled into the back of the heads. You see a cup, fashioned from a human cranium, polished smooth. Ilma kneels and lifts a jawbone with a stick. Still fat on this one, she mutters. Marrow, Ashu says. You look at him. He meets your gaze. They liked it soft, said it tasted like life. He says it the way a bird might recall the shape of a cage. You feel your stomach twist, not from hunger, from memory, because you've heard this before, not in words, but in the way the attackers moved, in the patterns of their signs, in the bones they left behind. This wasn't chaos. It was ritual. You find more pits, one with only feet, one with tiny vertebrae, another with arms all broken at the same angle, and always the skulls, split, scraped, arranged. Dren finds a circle of them facing inward, jaws open, like they were watching something, like they were chanting. Ilma finds an old platform nearby, half buried in ash. She uncovers what's left of a rack, bones laid out like offerings, each marked with a symbol. Some are recognizable. The spiral, the hand, the slash, one you haven't seen before. A crescent moon carved into a shin. Ashu touches it and whispers, "Those were the singers." He doesn't explain. He doesn't need to. You sit beside the largest fire pit and stare into it. It hasn't been lit in years, but the stones are still warm. You can feel it. Ilma gathers everyone in a ring. Ashu, Dren, you, 3 others, scouts from neighboring remnants. All of you staring at the past. All of you asking the same question without speaking it aloud. Why? Ashu answers. They thought they were gods. You blink. He continues. Not the ones who lived here, the ones who fed, the ones who took them. Dren frowns. You mean the attackers? Ashu nods. They came before the raids, before the walls. They brought hunger with them. Said the flesh carried memories. Said if you ate enough of the right bone, you could remember a time before pain. You feel cold, colder than the wind. Ashu's voice lowers. They didn't kill for war. They killed for silence. What silence? Ilma asks. Ashu looks at the fire pit. The one inside the skull. No one speaks after that. You rise and walk the perimeter alone. There are markings in the soil. Old footsteps. Some large. Some small. Some barefoot. And then you see them. Carvings on the inside of the ruined wall. Dozens. Figures tall, thin, arms too long, heads without features. All of them facing inward, at a single spiral in the center. You run your fingers over the spiral. It's been cut again and again, deep enough to wear down the stone beneath. Not decoration, obsession. Herxheim wasn't a victim. It was a beacon, a place where the cult began, or where it found its purpose. You return to the others with a stone in your hand. It bears the same spiral, but something else, 5 smaller lines radiating outward, like a hand, a warning, or an invitation. You hold it up. Ilma takes it. We burn this place, she says. You don't argue. The sun sets behind the ridge. The firewood is wet, but it burns anyway, like the land itself wants to forget, like even the bones are tired of being remembered. You light the pit. You throw in the skulls. You watch the smoke rise, thick, black, sour. You cover your son's face with your shawl. He doesn't cry, but he watches. And when the flames reach the sky, he whispers, "They'll know we were here." Yes, they will. And maybe, for the first time, they'll wonder what it means. Eat or be eaten. Ashu doesn't sleep that night. He stares into the flames as if they might rewrite what he's seen. as if watching the bones of Herxheim blacken and curl in the fire might unburn something inside him. You sit beside him. He doesn't flinch, doesn't speak. So you wait. Eventually, the words come. They didn't start with killing, he says. The others have drifted off. Dren lying flat under his cloak, Ilma resting upright, eyes open, mind racing. The wind has picked up, sifting ash into soft gray dunes between the pits. You and Ashu remain awake. They started with hunger, he continues. A kind you don't feel in your belly, the kind that scratches behind your teeth. You say nothing, just listen. Ashu pulls something from beneath his tunic. A carved stone, smooth and bone-white, polished by hands, not water. He turns it over once, twice, then places it beside the fire. It was their offering bowl, he says. They passed it around before the feast. You look down. It's a skull fragment, the curved dome of a human forehead, shaved and sealed with wax at the edges. Inside are scratches, tiny lines spiraling inward. Not writing, not symbols, just motion, like something recorded a memory through pain. Ashu speaks low, his voice gravel and smoke. They told us the bones had voices. Voices? You ask. He nods. They said if you cracked the skull just right and boiled it with tongue, you could hear what the dead remembered, like stories left in the marrow. You feel your stomach twist. He goes on. They made us sit in circles, always circles. You weren't allowed to speak unless you'd tasted, and you weren't allowed to sleep unless you'd swallowed. You ask the question slowly. Swallowed what? Ashu doesn't answer right away. He lifts the hem of his tunic, revealing a faded scar across his ribs. A bite mark. Small. Human. They started with pieces, he says. Fingers. Ears. The tongue was sacred. Only the elders were allowed to eat that. Said it carried the soul. You force yourself to breathe slowly. Ashu's eyes don't blink. Not once. They told me I was lucky, he says. That I would live longer. That the meat would make me wise. He clenches his fists. I think it only made me empty. The fire cracks. A piece of charred bone splits with a hiss and falls inward. Ashu doesn't even glance at it. I saw them boil brains and skulls, he whispers. They used ash and elder root to thicken it. They said it made you dream of the first songs, of the time before we walked. He turns to you. I never dreamed, only screamed. You feel your throat close, and still he speaks. There were rules, rituals. You couldn't eat alone. You had to give thanks to the bones. You had to carve the spiral after every meal. You look toward the walls, where soot-marked spirals still glow faintly. You realize now what they meant. Not just symbols, not warnings, but records, proof of every memory consumed. Ashu lowers his voice. I think they forgot why they started. You nod gently. That's why they kept eating, he says. Not because they were hungry, but because they were afraid to stop. You want to reach for him, but you don't. He wouldn't feel it. Not tonight. He reaches again into his tunic and pulls out a final item. A tooth. Flat. Human. Polished like glass. They wore them around their necks, he says. Said it kept the ghosts quiet. He offers it to you. You hesitate. Then take it. It's cold. Heavier than it should be. You drop it into the fire without speaking. Ashu doesn't stop you. He just watches it vanish. Then, for the first time, his voice trembles. I buried my friend, he says, before I escaped. She was too small. They said she wasn't enough. So they gave her to me. Said it was a lesson. You close your eyes. Ashu breathes in deep and quiet. I wrapped her in bark and herbs, dug with my hands. The dirt was wet. I told her I was sorry. I didn't know what else to say. Silence. Then softly. She never screamed. You open your eyes again. The fire has burned low now. The pits of Herxheim glow like the mouths of sleeping gods. Ashu stands, walks toward one of the outer markers, an upright femur with spiral notches. He takes his blade and carves a new mark. Not a spiral, not a line, but a handprint. Then he places the blade at its base. and walks away. You watch as the wind picks up again. And for the first time since arriving, it carries no scent of blood. Only ash and memory. The daughters survive. You first noticed it in the way the burial pits were shaped. So many men, so few women. Even in Herxheim, even in the horror and rot of that place, there were patterns in the pits. Rows of cracked skulls and hacked shoulders, split rib cages like dry fish bones. All of them marked as male by the hip width, by the angle of the jaw. And when women did appear, their remains told a different story. No cracks, no bite marks, no signs of ritual consumption. The women had not been eaten. They had been taken. You turn that thought over in your head like a sharp stone. You want to dull it, soften the edges, but it only grows more defined the longer you carry it. The women were not prey. They were purpose. You're thinking of that when Ilma returns from the hill camp with word of another fallen village. This one deeper in the northern woods. 33 people, 27 men, all found piled. Not burned, not torn apart, just gone cold. But the 6 women, still there, still alive, still bearing children. The men were taken, Ilma says. The women were told to wait. You sit across the fire, her voice barely audible over the crackling wood. What do they want? You ask, already fearing the answer. She doesn't blink. Lineage, that word again. It's not about conquest anymore. Not even about ritual. This blood. Yours. Your son's. Dren's. Every bargained son who sleeps with his spear close and his breath shallow. You remember the old chants now. Ones your mother sang while sewing furs. The daughters stay. The sons must prove. The blood that fails is swept away. You never understood what it meant. Not until now. You walk with Ilma the next morning to the stone ridge where the lookout stands. You bring your son. He doesn't ask why. He stopped asking. He sees too much. Dren joins you halfway there. He's quieter these days. His voice carries more weight now, not from age, but from grief he doesn't show. You haven't seen him sleep in 4 nights. At the ridge, Ilma kneels beside a new trail. A path worn thin into the grass, faint but deliberate. It circles the village in a wide arc, just outside spear range. They're watching again, she says, but they're not looking for a breach. They're counting. You glance at her. Counting what? Fertility, strength, compliance. You don't respond. You can't. You look down at your son. He grips his knife tightly, and then you hear her say, almost too softly, "They don't want war. They want husbands." The words hit like ice down your spine. You think of the skull cups, the marrow rights, the spirals scratched into pelvis bones. And now this cold, quiet plan? You return to the village. Everyone feels it. Like the wind's shifted, though the trees don't move. Jal is standing outside the fire circle, clutching a length of cord. "There's a girl missing," he says. He doesn't say her name. He doesn't need to. She was 12. Too young for marriage. Too old to hide. She'd gone to the stream alone. You find her tracks half buried in mud. Another set, larger, wider, barefoot, follows. Then disappears. A spiral is scratched into a stone by the water's edge. You don't find the girl. You return in silence. That night, Ilma gathers every woman in the village. No men allowed. You try to listen from outside, but the fire crackles too loud. Your son sits beside you, carving a figure from ash wood, tall and blank-faced. He doesn't say what it is. The next day, the women begin carving glyphs into their doors, strange combinations of handprints and lines. You ask Ilma about them. "They're declarations," she says. "Of what?" "Belonging, defiance, submission, all 3. You ask, "Will it work?" She shrugs. "They think it might." The sky that night is empty of stars, and you begin to dream. You dream of a tree whose roots are bones, whose leaves are tongues. You dream of men marching backward into the forest, holding nothing, naming no one. You dream of women who bear children with no faces, and who sing lullabies in languages you no longer understand. You wake covered in sweat. Your son is already up, sharpening his blade. He says he didn't sleep at all. That day, a messenger arrives from a village far to the east. A woman, gaunt and dust-covered, riding a makeshift sled pulled by a wounded goat. She looks barely alive. She tells her story in pieces. Her people had offered tribute, meat, tools, even 2 young men. They took the men, she said, and left. No, her voice breaks. They came back. For the women. Not to kill. Not to harm. Just to collect. To collect. They marked us. Like herds. Those who could bear children. Those who had already borne sons. They marked us with pigment. Red for strong wombs. Blue for dry ones. Then they left again. You don't know what to say. Ilma says it for you. They're building something. The messenger nods. A new order. That night, a girl in your village shaves her head and carves a spiral into her own thigh. No one stops her. No one scolds her. She walks with her chin high, limping, and paints her door with red pigment in the shape of an open mouth. The next day, another girl follows. And another. Soon, half the women bear some kind of mark, voluntary, angry, desperate. Not all the same. Not even shared. But something. Ilma watches, and for the first time in weeks, she smiles. They want to shape us, she says. Let them try. You ask what she means. She doesn't explain. But the next morning, she paints her face in black lines, like claws reaching from her jaw to her eyes. And every girl under 13 does the same. You stand on the wall that night, spear in hand, watching the tree line. The forest stares back. And somewhere, far beyond sight, you know they're watching. But this time, you wonder if they understand what they've started. Because the daughters survive. And they are not silent. The last village falls. The smoke rose at first light. You smelled it before you saw it. Sharp and bitter. Not like cooking fires or wet bark, but like burning hair and old blood. The wind carried it across the hills in a slow crawl, bringing silence with it. Even the crows didn't circle. Ilma was already standing when you stepped outside. Dren and Jal were strapping on bone-plated harnesses. No one spoke. The scout had come running just before dawn, panting, bleeding from a gash down his thigh. He'd fallen twice, breath rattling in his chest like dry leaves. It's Duvam, he gasped. They came last night. They didn't fight. They just burned. Duvam was the only other village in the valley with a double wall and a standing watch. They had 35 defenders, 6 towers, clay-padded huts, smoke flares, whistles, backup fires, a system. They were your mirror, your rival, your reassurance. And now they were gone. Ilma gathered the defenders without ceremony. No chants, no drums, no stories, just names and assignments. You asked to go. She looked at your son. He was helping tie spears to a sled of pitch bundles. Then she nodded. The trip to Duvam took 2 hours. It should have taken 3, but everyone moved fast. Too fast, because you could see the sky before you reached the hill. A low red haze, faint embers dancing across the morning mist. The forest near the trail had been cut back last season. The path was clear. That made it worse. You saw the bodies before you saw the walls. They weren't laid out. They weren't buried. They were stacked. Neatly. Men. All men. Some with faces still intact. Others less so. There were signs of resistance. Broken spears, arrows, shallow trenches. But no blood on the ground. Only in the air. And something else. A smell you couldn't place at first. Not death. Not fire. Sweet. Fermented. Like overripe berries left in the sun. You realized slowly that it was from the skin. They had been preserved. Somehow. You didn't want to know how. The outer wall of Duvam had been pulled apart. Not smashed. Rolled back. Peeled. Like the bark from a green branch. Inside the gates, the huts were untouched. Pots still sat by the hearths. Baskets of grain lay unsplit. Clothes still hung. You felt like a ghost walking through it all. A place not destroyed, but emptied. Then you saw the women, alive, gathered in the center, hands behind their backs, eyes open, mouths shut, marked. Ilma stopped 5 paces away, raised one hand. The women didn't flinch. One stepped forward. A younger girl, 17 maybe, her face painted with black ash in the shape of a sun. "They left us," she said. Dren asked, "Why?" She didn't answer, just turned and showed her back. There, carved into the skin along her spine, was a spiral. Fresh, still weeping. "They said we were part of the new order," she whispered. "Where are the others?" Jal asked. "Gone. The men." She turned back. "They didn't take the ones who ran, only the ones who stood." You watched her eyes flicker. "They told us the bloodline was too loud, that the sons made too much noise. You thought of your own son, of the way he'd taken to sharpening blades before sunrise, the quiet certainty with which he now held a spear, the way he never asked if he'd live, only if he'd be remembered." Ilma crouched by one of the surviving women, lifted her chin, examined the markings on her cheek, thin lines branching like tree roots. "They're not random," she murmured. "They're classifications." You returned to the village that evening with heavy steps and a heavier heart. No one asked what happened. The smell on your clothes answered for you. You sat by the fire, your son close beside you. His eyes searched your face not for fear, but for how afraid he should be. You lied with a smile, and when he turned away, you whispered a name into your hands. Not a prayer, not a plea, just a name. One of the men from Duvam, a boy you had met once, traded smoked fish for salt, laughed about the taste. He was quiet, gentle, gone. That night, the walls of your village changed. They felt closer, tighter, not safety, containment. Ilma called a midnight council. Only 10 remained in attendance. Not from apathy, from lack of people. She placed stones on the ground again. Your village, Duvam, Herxheim, Schletz, so many names, so few voices. They're not here to destroy us, she said. They're here to rewrite us. You asked what she meant. They want the children, not ours but the next, and the next, and the next. Dren leaned forward. So what do we do? Ilma didn't blink. We give them nothing. Jal's jaw tensed. We're outnumbered. Not yet, she said, but soon. And then we stop counting. You didn't sleep. The fires burned low. You watched your son wrap his blanket around his feet, curl his fingers around his blade, and whisper words you couldn't hear. You wished you could keep him small, safe. But tomorrow, the line between child and defender would vanish. Because tonight, the last mirror fell. Duvam was gone. And now, there was only you. The silence of the fathers. The days grew still. Not quiet, still. The kind of stillness that lives in the breath between lightning and thunder. In the moment when a hunter draws a bowstring and does not release. You felt it in the way people walked. In how your son stopped asking to play. In how the birds flew higher now, further away from smoke and sound. You used to wake to the bleating of goats, the creak of leather, the arguing of elders over whose turn it was to empty the midden pit. Now you woke to nothing. The animals had stopped making noise. The elders had stopped speaking. Something had settled in the village, thick and heavy, like river silt in the lungs. Even the children, what few remained, played with something like grief behind their laughter. They threw stones in silence, pretended their bones were spears, and the fathers, one by one, they began to vanish. They didn't die. There were no cries, no attacks, no bloodstained trails. They simply left. Each night, one fewer sat at the evening fire. Each morning, one fewer footprint by the water's edge. No explanations, no farewells. Some said it was shame, others premonition. A few believed it was sacrifice. Ilma said nothing. You weren't sure she was wrong, because you understood in some deep and ancient way that the war wasn't just about survival now. It was about stories, and in those stories, there was no room left for old men. One evening, you found your neighbor, the one who carved stone bowls and who once gave your son his first flint knife, sitting on a flat rock above the valley. He was staring at the sun, not watching it set, exactly, just staring as if waiting for it to explain something. When he turned to you, His eyes were hollowed like tree hollows in winter bark. "I taught him to fish," he said. You nodded. "He was 5. Caught a trout longer than his arm." You nodded again. "He won't need that skill, will he?" You didn't know what to say. He reached out and touched your shoulder, not in comfort, but in passing. Then he walked away. You never saw him again. That night, Ilma gathered the remaining men. There were 9. She asked them all to sit in a circle. Then she passed around a clay bowl. Inside it, ash, feathers, and a single smooth river stone. No one spoke. You were third to hold it. The ash clung to your fingertips like memory. Ilma said only this, "Choose what remains," and passed it on. Later, as you sat by the fire with your son, he asked about the stone. What did it mean? You considered lying. But the weight of the past week had made lies heavy. "It means you must live." He frowned. "I was already going to." You shook your head. "No, I mean you must live after. Through it. Past it. With it." He nodded slowly, then leaned against your arm and whispered something you didn't expect. "I dreamed about Herxheim." Your breath caught. He continued. "There were pits. Deep. But they were full of stars, not bones." You didn't know what to say, so you just sat there, with your hand on his back, and felt the bones beneath the skin of your son who might become the only story left. 2 days later, Ilma came to you at dawn. It was still dark, the fire cold, and your breath came in short clouds. "Tonight," she said. "It has to be tonight." You didn't ask what. You already knew. They had been spotted again. Those who wore no clan colors, whose weapons bore the spiral markings, who painted their teeth with blue clay. A scout had returned, whispering that they were less than half a day's march away. Ilma gathered the children and mothers first. Then she turned to the fathers. "I can't order you to stay," she said, "but you already know what the story needs." One by one, the men nodded. You nodded too. Your son watched you, wide-eyed, a question behind his mouth. You pulled him aside. Knelt, told him something you never thought you'd have to say. "I'm not coming with you." He looked at you as if you'd just stepped out of his world. His lips parted. He shook his head. "Why?" You put your hand over his. "Because you still have a chance to live without becoming what I've had to be." His brow furrowed. "That's not fair." "No," you agreed. "But it's a gift. I don't want it." "You will." And then softer. "You must." He didn't cry. Neither did you. But something cracked, deep inside, like the first fracture in thawing ice. Ilma took the group down into the hidden ravine where they'd built the fallback shelter. Just mud and stone and silence. You stayed behind, watched their torches vanish over the ridge. Then you turned to the others. 7 fathers. 1 boy too old to flee. 1 man with no family left. You were the last story the village would ever tell. The sky that night was strangely clear. No clouds. No wind. You sat by the fire. Ate dried roots. Passed a horn of fermented berries around. And when the sounds began, slow footsteps, the faint crack of branches, you stood. No armor. Just cloth. A single flint blade. Ilma's parting words rang in your head. "Let them take no trophies." You would not be a trophy. None of you would. Chapter 4, Ash and Wind. You wake before dawn. The fire is little more than embers now, and smoke hangs low like a veil across the blackened earth. You are surprised to find yourself breathing, surprised your chest still rises and falls when so much of the world around you no longer does. There had been no grand battle, no clash of swords or line of warriors bellowing at one another in a final, defiant stand. What came was quieter, more efficient, more terrifying. They arrived like mist, 30, maybe 40 of them, silent as ghosts in the dark. Not like warriors, not like heroes of old, but like men doing work. Men used to doing this many times before. You remember the flick of their bone knives, the soft sounds, snapping wood, strangled breath, the heavy thud of bodies hitting dirt. Your companions had stood, mostly. Only a few tried to run. There was nowhere to run, really. But you did something you hadn't expected. You lived. You don't know how. Your leg bears a deep gash, your side burns with a bruised rib, but you are alive. The others are not. You stare out across the ravaged village, only what little remains. The bodies of men you shared meals with, laughed with, cried with, all still now, some stripped of their teeth, some half-buried already, not by kindness, but by passing boots that didn't care where they stepped. Above you, the sky is smeared in red and gray. Smoke still rises from the granary. Your home is gone, burned down to bone and black soot. But you do not cry. Instead, you walk. Slow, limping, your feet dragging lines through ash as you move toward the place they had hidden. The ravine, the shelter, the last hope. Every step feels stolen. Every breath tastes like someone else's air. But you carry something now, a thing larger than your wound, heavier than your bones. You carry the memory, not just of last night, but of what came before. The children's laughter, the fire stories, Ilma's voice as she handed you the bowl of ash and stone. Choose what remains. The ravine is hidden by brambles and brush, just as planned. You whisper Ilma's name before descending, just in case. No reply, no birdsong either. You crawl down, and there, tucked among the rocks, you find them. Alive. Ilma is crouched with the others, her knife gripped in a blood-smeared hand. She sees you and doesn't move at first, unsure whether you're one of them or one of you. Then, recognition softens her face, and she lets out a long breath. Your son bolts toward you. You nearly collapse under the weight of him. His face presses into your chest like he's trying to make sure you're real. You wince, but you hold him anyway. Ilma nods once, then looks beyond you, at the smoke curling upward in slow, bitter spirals. "How many?" she asks. You don't answer. She doesn't press. Instead, she kneels beside a flat stone, spreads out a piece of bark, and begins to mark something in charcoal. Not a list of the dead, not a map, something older, more sacred, a lineage. You realize, watching her draw the symbols, that this is what the war had become. Not about land, not about food, not even about vengeance. It had become about memory. Who gets remembered, who does not, who leaves a line behind, and who vanishes forever. Later that morning, you gather what little was saved. Some root vegetables, a water skin, a bundle of dried moss for wounds. The children are silent, except for one small boy who hums without realizing. The tune is a lullaby. You don't stop him. Ilma sits beside you. "They'll come again," she says. It's not a question. "Yes. And we won't be ready." "No." She sighs and closes her eyes. "Then we make it harder. We don't give them names. We don't give them clean deaths. We give them mystery." You glance at her. "We disappear?" you ask. She shakes her head. "No. We become legend." You don't know how long you sit there, letting her words settle into the marrow of your thoughts. Around you, the children start to stir. They do not cry. They do not ask for their fathers. They already know. That evening, you leave the ravine. You move south. Ilma says there's water 2 valleys away, caves big enough for 20 people. She says there are others, survivors, strangers, lost families. She says the world is burning and regrowing at the same time. And as you limp forward with the others, something in you shifts. It is no longer about the war. It is about the seed, the idea that what you carry, these few children, these stories, these scars, might one day become a forest. That centuries from now, someone might dig into the earth and find not your name, not your bones, but the echo of your choice. To stay, to protect, to outlast. Your son walks beside you, dragging a crooked stick like a walking staff. At one point, he asks you why the sky is pink. You tell him it's because the world is tired, and the sun is learning to sleep. He nods like this makes perfect sense. You smile, and then, as the wind picks up and scatters ash through the valley, you feel it again, that ancient, wordless feeling passed down in blood and dust. The story is not over. Not yet. And you, limping, wounded, grimy with soot and sorrow, are still part of it. Still walking forward. Still breathing. Still here. The scarred path. You walk until the horizon forgets your name. The path you follow is no road, not in the way people from ages ahead will know it. It is a wound in the landscape. Flattened grass, a whisper of burned earth, broken stalks of barley curling in on themselves like fingers refusing death. There is no map, only memory. Ilma leads, and you trust her because she still walks with purpose. Even when she limps, even when her voice goes hoarse from silence. The group behind you is shrinking. Not from death, not yet, but from where? Feet bleed, children shiver. Old men who once joked in the longhouse now mutter to themselves. Heads bowed like their necks grew too heavy with grief. Still, no one turns back. There is nothing to go back to. The sun is white above you, too bright to look at, too cold to feel. It glares off the stones like the judgment of forgotten gods. The valley hums with insect life, but no birds sing. Even the animals seem quieter these days, as if they've learned to tiptoe past the history humans spilled across the land. Ahead, a tree lies half dead, split by lightning, blackened at the core. You pass it in silence. Ilma stops beside a strange pattern of stones. Once a hearth, now a grave. She kneels. The others give her space. You know this ritual. It's not prayer. It's memory. When a woman kneels before a destroyed fire circle, she isn't mourning just the flames. She's mourning the hands that once warmed beside them, the voices that argued over charred meat, the child who danced in its light. Ilma sets down 3 pebbles, one for each name she doesn't say aloud. Then she rises again and you move on. Later, the wind picks up. It carries scents you don't want. Old blood, rot hidden under moss, ash that was once bread and shelter. The children huddle tighter. One boy walks with both hands clenched around a carved stick shaped like a spear. His father carved it for him the day before the raid. You remember. You saw it. The man died smiling, shielding his son. A soft whistle breaks the air. Everyone stops. Ilma raises her hand. Another whistle. This one higher, sharper. Then silence. She signs quickly with her fingers. Hide. The group scatters, practiced now in this kind of terror. Bushes swallow children. Fallen logs embrace mothers and packs. You and Ilma slide behind a mossy ridge, hearts pounding like wild drums. From the far ridge, 2 figures appear. Not soldiers. Scouts. They carry no flags. No armor. Just thick furs and curved knives. One of them points to a stone. Crouches. Picks something up. A shard of pottery, perhaps. You squint. It's red. Familiar. He gestures to the other. They speak. You can't hear the words, but you know the language. It's the tongue of a tribe long thought dead. One that once farmed river millet. One that traded flint blades and songs for smoked fish. They had been kind. Once. You grip your stone knife. Ilma does the same. The 2 men move on. They don't see you, but they were close. Too close. When the silence returns, it takes longer for everyone to come out. A girl sobs softly in her sister's arms. An elder clutches his chest, whispering something under his breath. Something about wolves wearing familiar faces. You resume the march. The next valley is worse. Here, black posts rise from the ground. Totems once meant to guide the dead, now defiled. Skulls dangle from hemp cords, some polished, some still bearing patches of hair. There is a symbol painted in ochre, swirled and ugly. A spiral struck through with a jagged line. Ilma spits at it. They've made gods of their hunger, she mutters. You do not stop. Later that day, you find remnants of a village. Not yours. This one is older. The roofs caved in long ago, their wooden bones curled like dead spiders. You enter what once was a communal hut. On the wall, faded charcoal figures dance. A deer, a mother, a fire. A handprint, small and clear, preserved by accident. It's the size of your son's. He touches it. Then he asks, "Are they still here?" You shake your head. "No." "Were they like us?" You pause. "Yes, and no." That night you set a cold camp, no fire, no laughter. Just sleep under a sky too wide for comfort. The stars look down without blinking. Silent judges. You dream of voices. Not screams, just soft whispers, the kind shared between warriors before a battle. Someone says your name. Someone else says the name of a girl you haven't seen since spring, back before the first raids. You wake sweating. Ilma is already awake, carving a notch into her walking staff. One more day survived. One more breath stolen from death's purse. In the morning you find tracks. Dozens of them. Not boots, bare feet, small and many. Children. But they're wrong. Too symmetrical. Spaced oddly. They drag them, Ilma says. Her face is pale. To make it harder to follow. A trick. A lie made of footprints. You step more carefully now. That day you reach the high ridge. From here, the valley opens wide below. Green, dappled with shadow, cut by a silver thread of water. And there, on the other side, smoke. Not fire. Hearths. Ilma's breath catches. There, she says. A new place. Unburned. Unknown. You watch it for a long time before moving. A place to begin. You crest the final slope just before dusk, boots caked with weeks of dust and dried blood. Your breath shallow from the climb. The smoke from the settlement across the valley is thicker now, curling into the air like ribboned ink. Not black good. Not the harsh, choking stain of fire and ruin. This is campfire smoke. Cooking smoke. The kind that once meant stew and safety. It stings your nose not because it offends, but because you had forgotten what peace smelled like. You don't step forward yet. No one does. Ilma crouches behind a bramble thicket. Her sharp eyes scan the clearing below. Children run between wooden huts, holding hands, chasing a black chicken that looks fatter than anything you've seen in months. Men unload bundles from a river raft, their movements quick but not panicked. Women laugh softly but clearly, freely. You squint, uncertain if your mind is showing you a memory instead of the present. They're real, Ilma says, quiet and almost reverent. Not raiders, not ghosts. You don't answer right away, because if they're real, that means a decision must be made. You think of the others huddled behind you, your ragged, worn band of half-starved survivors. People with more ghosts than shoes. Some have begun whispering among themselves. The boy with the carved stick clutches it tighter, half out of habit, half in fear. They'll never take us in, says old Hark, his voice a rumble like dry thunder. No one does. We look like wolves. Ilma doesn't argue. She just watches. She's always been more stone than flame. You sit down, cross-legged. The grass under you is surprisingly soft, and for the first time in many moons, you let your body truly rest on the ground. It's warm. Earth has not forgotten how to comfort. There's another option, you say. Your voice surprises even you. It doesn't tremble. Ilma looks at you. Go on. We wait until nightfall. Slip into the woods behind their outer ridge. Watch for patterns, guards, routines, weak points. Like bandits, she replies. Like survivors. Her jaw tightens, but she nods. Night comes faster than you expect. The stars blink into place one by one, like cautious eyes. A crescent moon casts just enough light to keep you from stumbling as you crawl down through thickets and ashweed. The woods near the settlement are denser, untouched by fire. You smell wild garlic and dry leaves. You and Ilma lie flat behind a mossy boulder. Just ahead, two guards stand with long spears, chatting in low tones. They wear no armor. Their eyes don't scan far. They're relaxed. They don't expect war, Ilma whispers. You study their stance, their posture, their confidence, and it makes you ache. Because once your people looked like that too. You withdraw quietly, back to the group. We try, you tell them. We walk forward in peace. If they raise weapons, we fall back. But we don't hide anymore. Some of them object. Some tremble. But no one runs. At dawn, Ilma walks at your side, down the slope, toward the unknown hearths. You keep your hands raised. By the time the guards see you, it's too late to shout or scramble for defense. You're halfway to the palisade before one of them stammers out, "Who goes?" You stop. "My name is on," you say. "This is Ilma. We come from the North Hills." A pause. Then, "What do you want?" "Shelter." and peace, if you have either. The guard looks behind him. 2 more villagers have appeared, one older woman with a clay-covered apron, and a man with a bow slung across his back, not yet drawn. They speak in low tones. Then the elder woman steps forward. "We've seen you on the ridge," she says. "You watched us. That scares people. I understand. Are you carrying illness? No. Are you carrying war?" You look her in the eyes. "No." A long silence. Then she nods. "You may enter, but the rest stay up there until we decide." You glance back. Ilma doesn't move, but her body tightens. "I need to speak for them," you say. The woman considers, then gestures. You and Ilma pass through the gate. The first thing that strikes you inside is the color. These people still dye their fabrics, deep ochres, bark brown, pale red. A child runs past you with ribbons tied to her hair, laughing. It hits you in the chest harder than grief. You are taken to a central lodge, warm but not overbearing. The woman introduces herself. "I'm Maru. I keep the meals and the memories." Ilma raises a brow. "We've heard of you," Maru adds. "That stops you both. There's talk among the riverside folk. Bands that came down weeks ago, ragged, quiet, kind. Said they were saved by strangers from the ash valleys. Said they lived because someone named Ilma warned them of a raid." Ilma doesn't speak. "You do. We lost more than we saved." Maru nods. "But you tried. That's the difference." You eat that night inside the lodge. Real food, real warmth, even if you can't yet sleep. They let the rest come down by the next sunrise. One by one, your survivors enter. Some weep, some collapse. No one speaks loudly. By midday, they have bathed, cut hair, been given rough clothes. Names are shared around the central fire. Laughter, real laughter, returns. You walk through the new settlement like a ghost made flesh, touching wooden walls, running fingers along unbroken baskets. One child, someone else's son, hands you a wooden carving. "A rabbit," he says. "It's lucky." You kneel. "I think it is. But it's not all healing. You still dream of screaming. You still flinch at sudden shadows. And when you see new men walk into the village, strangers with spears, your hand goes to your belt, even though there's no knife there anymore. That night, Ilma joins you by the river. "They asked me to stay," she says, "as a guide." You look at her. "Will you?" She nods. "I think I want to." You pause. "I want to build something." Ilma watches the water. Then start. The ground is tired, but it still remembers how to grow things. The stars shimmer above. The moon drips its soft light on the river. You dip your hand in the water. Cold, clean, alive. And you realize this isn't the end. It's the first chapter of something else. Something softer. Something worth remembering. The echoes we leave. The rains come early that season, soft and gray. Not the violent storms that scoured the hills in your youth, but a constant, nourishing drizzle that settles into the land like forgiveness. The settlement, no longer strange, no longer foreign, responds to it. Mushrooms bloom along the fences. Rows of wheat green the soil again. Wooden eaves are patched with reed mats to keep out the mist. You wake each morning now not to war drums, but to the cough of old goats and the yawn of children. A strange luxury, one you still don't quite trust. Ilma keeps a map now etched onto bark cloth. Not of armies, but of nearby paths, of stream bends and berry groves. She shows it to the younger ones. There's a girl who follows her like a shadow, quick-eyed and barefoot. You don't ask Ilma about the child's past. You understand it already. Your hands, which once shook from cold and rage, now shape clay into cups. At first, you don't know what you're doing. But Maru helps. Her voice is slow and sure, like water carving stone. She speaks in parables. "A cracked bowl holds the best soup," she likes to say, and her eyes never flinch, even when you speak of fire and bones. One night by the hearth, she tells you something you never expected to hear. "We've started keeping a list," she says. You glance up. A record of names, of those who came through ash and didn't turn to smoke. You blink. "We've forgotten so many," she continues. And what we forget, we repeat. She pulls a narrow strip of hide from a pouch. On it, etched in careful dye, are not words but symbols. A star, a broken circle, a spear with a leaf wrapped around it. Yours. I want to tell your story, Murmur says. You brought others here. You made them stop running. You shake your head. I just didn't die. That's not a story. She raises a brow. Of course it is. The oldest kind. The fire crackles between you, and something inside your chest loosens just a little. Days pass, then moons, then seasons. One morning, you hear children arguing near the southern field. You step outside to see what's happened, expecting a fight or a bruise. But instead, they are gathered around a flat stone slab. One of the boys has found a mark, deep and straight, like a gouge. Another calls it a trail. A third insists it's a rune. You kneel and brush the dirt away, and there, faint but real, is an old carving. A human hand, not new, weathered. Beside it, another, smaller, a child's. I think someone left this here, one girl says, so they wouldn't forget. You nod. They didn't want to disappear. Later that evening, you return alone to that stone. You trace the handprints with your fingertips. They are smaller than yours, faded by time, but real. You begin to understand what Maru meant. The war had taken nearly all the men, but it had not taken all their stories. Word spreads slowly in this age, not by messengers, but by shepherds, by fishermen, by wandering sisters of old rites who carry baskets and blessings. One such traveler arrives in your village as the frost sets in. Her name is Tellen. She has hair like straw, a laugh like a cracked bell, and she carries a sack full of songs. At night, the entire lodge gathers to hear her. She sings of mountain hunts, of frozen lakes that open like mouths, of children born in silence who speak only in dreams. But her final story is different. She clears her throat. The room quiets. There was a time, she says, not long ago, when the world bled boys like rain. No one stirs. No army marched. No banner flew. It was not one war, but many all at once. Brother against brother. Clan against stranger. Teeth and sticks and fire. A hush falls so deep you can hear the fire settle. But not all died, Tellen continues. Some watched. Some ran. Some hid in caves with the ghosts of their fathers. And some chose not to kill again. She looks at you. At first, they were few. But over time, they found others, built fires, dug gardens, told stories again. A child beside you whispers, "Are they real?" Tellen smiles. As real as this breath, as real as your voice. They lived, so you could be born. She leaves the next morning, doesn't say goodbye, just sings softly as she disappears into the mist. But her story lingers. You see it in the way the children start etching their names onto bark, in the way young men sit around the fire and ask about the before, in the way even the oldest survivors begin to speak, not just of loss, but of what came after. You begin to wonder if maybe the story didn't start with the war, but with the choosing to end it. A traveling smith appears one day. His cart is loud, his story's louder. He sells tools and charms and something you've not seen in years. A copper mirror. It's crude, uneven, but it reflects your face clearly. You stare at yourself longer than you mean to. The lines, the eyes, the hint of a scar near your brow. This is the face of a survivor, but it is also the face of someone who has lived. And the longer you stare, the less it looks like a weapon. Winter settles in full. And yet, unlike years past, there is no hunger, no crying at night. The stores are full. The walls are strong. The hearths never go dark. Ilma still walks the ridge every morning, watching the horizon. She carries no spear now, just a woven shawl and a walking stick. One day, she returns with news. There's another group, 10 maybe more, East Trail, hungry, but whole. You both glance at each other, then smile. I'll start the stew, you say. Later, the newcomers arrive. Muddy, cautious, quiet. You greet them with a hand outstretched. One of them, A boy barely 20 looks at your fingers with disbelief. "No one welcomes strangers anymore," he says. You shrug. "We do." The boy begins to cry. You don't ask why. You simply bring him inside. That night, as you lay beneath a roof you helped thatch, listening to the familiar creaks and rustles of a village alive and warm, you realize something has shifted. Not just in the world. In you. You are no longer a wanderer. You are no longer the hunted. You are part of a memory that endures. A living one. And when the first flakes of spring fall weeks later, when the ice melts and the flowers return, it is not as a rebirth, but as a continuation. A whisper, soft and slow. We were here. We lived. We chose something better. And someday, someone will carve your name into stone. And they will know you helped end the war. After the silence, the wind has changed. Not in temperature. It is still brisk and earthy, curling through the village with that soft note of wood smoke and tilled soil, but in rhythm. It no longer sounds like a warning. It carries no echo of stampeding feet or distant screaming. Instead, it feels like breath, slow, continuous, full of meaning without the need for speech. You're not sure when you first noticed the silence. It wasn't after the last ambush, or even after the last funeral pyre. It was sometime later, long after the fires burned down and the weapons gathered dust. The silence didn't rush in. Crept. It crept into conversations by the hearth, into songs hummed by weavers, into laughter unburdened by fear. At first, it felt eerie, like the world had stopped holding its breath. But now you recognize it for what it is. It is peace, fragile, precious, but real. You rise before dawn, as you have for many moons. You no longer need to. There are others now, young, eager, willing. But you like the quiet hour. You like the way the stars fade, reluctantly, as the sky hesitates between black and blue. You walk the perimeter, not out of habit, but out of gratitude. The world still turns, and you are still here to see it. Near the central fire pit, a low wall has been built, half-circle, smoothed by hands and time. On it are dozens of carvings. You remember when there were only 5. Now each figure etched tells a story. Some are familiar, scenes from battles, clan symbols, mourning rites. Others are new, a child playing with a goat, a market trader holding up a fish like a prize, a midwife catching a newborn wrapped in bark cloth. Life, in all its sprawling, ordinary wonder. One carving near the center shows something simpler. 2 hands, one older, gnarled, one younger, delicate, reaching toward each other. No names, just the gesture. You remember the boy from the East Trail, the one who wept when you welcomed him. He carved that, with clumsy, careful strokes. Took him 2 days. You hadn't realized how much it would move you. Now you trace it every morning, as if reminding yourself, the war is over, and you were part of the reason why. Later that day, you gather with the elders, though the word feels strange on your tongue. Not because you aren't old enough, but because you never thought you'd live long enough to earn the title. There is a matter to discuss. A group from the southern ridge has sent word. They wish to trade. It is the 5th group this season. Maru passes around a bundle. Dried fish, a crude but sharp stone sickle, beads made of shell. Ilma nods. Good work. And they wish to bring stories too. You look up. Stories. She smiles. Yes, they've started keeping records. Not just of what was lost, but of what they rebuilt. There is a long silence. Then one of the younger voices, a girl barely past 20, says what you're all thinking. We should do the same. By nightfall, a decision is made. The wall will no longer hold just carvings. It will become a ledger, a living archive, one that tells the story not of kings or battles, but of survival, of choices, of people who looked at ruin and still decided to plant something. Ilma brings out bark scrolls. Others bring charcoal, bone tools, ochre powder. A boy who cannot speak brings symbols carved into wax. You bring your memory. You begin with names. The ones you remember. The ones who walked with you through hell. The ones who did not make it. But you also add names of those you only knew briefly. The woman who lit fires along the trail so others could follow. The man who shielded children beneath a broken cart. The old couple who opened their home when everyone else turned their backs. You add them all, because someone should. Maru suggests a title. You nod, and with care, scratch the words above the first panel. The time the world turned red. Below it, smaller, and how we learned to breathe again. The story spreads, not in the way war once did, quick, brutal, unstoppable, but in a slow, organic ripple. Travelers come to listen. Some stay for a night, some for a season. A few never leave. They bring their own stories, their own scars, their own hunger for something more than memory. They sit by the fire and trade tales. They help repair roofs. They plant seeds. And eventually, they add their names to the wall. Years pass. The village becomes a known place. Not a capital. Not a fortress. Just a beginning. The children born here grow up never knowing what it meant to hide under corpses, to run until your feet bled. They learn about the war the way you learned about storms, as something that came, that passed, that reshaped everything. You teach them what matters, how to hold a hand without suspicion, how to listen without waiting to be betrayed, how to grieve without drowning, and how to forgive the wind. There's a boy, quiet, awkward, with a face that's all angles and eyes too large for his head. He's not yours, not by blood, but he follows you like your shadow. You teach him to shape clay, to hunt with patience, not rage. One day he asks, "Is it true that they killed all the men?" You pause. They tried. But why didn't they get you? You think for a moment. I kept moving. I got lucky. And eventually, I stopped running. The boy looks confused. That's not luck. That's a story. You smile. Maybe it is. He nods, then runs off to chase goats. You watch him go, and the weight in your chest lifts just a little more. In spring, a new child is born. It happens under the branches of a plum tree during the first bloom of the season. The mother is strong. The child is loud. It is a boy, the firstborn here in over 3 years. He is named Ashen, not for destruction, but for the soil left behind that grows richest. The final carving you make on the wall is not of battle or pain or even healing. It is a path, winding, uneven, leading toward a rising sun. And beneath it, the simplest inscription: we chose to begin again. And now, when the wind returns, and it always does, you no longer brace for danger. You listen. You feel it on your skin like an old friend. Carries no blood now. Only pollen. Only breath. Only memory. And you whisper back to it not with fear, but with thanks. Because the silence that followed the darkest time in human memory did not break with more screams. It broke with stories. With names. With the simple choice to keep going. And that, in the end, was how the world was saved. Not by heroes, not by gods, but by those who survived and remembered.